There is another element that's important in creative writing, and it's point of view. And writers will sometimes just say POV. It's a little bit confusing because the phrase point of view has two meanings, actually. It can refer to a specific character who is the narrator of the piece, or we could say through whose eyes are we seeing the story. This narrator, or the one through whose eyes we are experiencing the story, can be called the point of view character. And point of view can also mean how the story is told, the way it is narrated, or the technique in which the story is told. And here we can speak of the kinds of point of view that a writer can use in telling his or her story. So for instance, a writer can use the first person point of view, I, first person, I. Then you can have the third person, which is he or she. And then you can have the omniscient point of view, which seems like it's third person, but it really isn't. It's the narrator is all knowing and can get into the consciousness of any or all characters. The omniscient point of view can also be what we call cinematic, so that the story unfolds like a movie. So sometimes the third person or the omniscient point of view can be mistaken because of the pronouns he or she. But what is important to remember is that the scope of the story in the third person point of view is told only from one character's consciousness. So if you hold that thought, then you will be fine. Generally, a writer will not decide before writing as to which technique to use. At least for me, it is instinctive, and it may deal also with any kind of problem that the writer may come across, which might compel his or her to switch from, say, first person to third person. You cannot say that this way is better than the other way. No point of view is better than the other. So for instance, and I mentioned to you, in my novel, When the Rainbow Goddess Wept, our point of view character is Yvonne, the young girl Yvonne, and her technique, the technique of storytelling, the story is told in the first person point of view, first person, I. So I thought I would, unfortunately, I cannot be with you live because there's 10 hours difference between my time in California and yours. But I want to answer some questions that you may have, and I am picking questions from other people at other talks, and they may be in your minds as well. So one question, two questions actually. Why do you write? And whom do you write for? So my answer is, I write for several reasons. First, sometimes the characters or situation will just latch onto my brain, and I must explore them and get them down in writing. It's almost like an obsession that I can't explain. And second, sometimes images and feelings need to be looked at and sorted out. Memories, for instance. And writing helps me do that. And third, I recognize that this ability to write is a gift. Not everybody can write. I recognize this is a gift from the Creator. And so, despite difficulties, I plod along because for some reason I have been gifted with this. And fourth, and this is more true for the books I have edited, when I compare our Philippine literature with Western literature, I can see that there are gaps in ours. It may be less now, but decades ago, there were obvious gaps to me. And that was actually how I got started editing anthologies, fiction by Filipinos in America. And then I got started on editing Growing Up Filipino, the first book, and then I did Growing Up Filipino 2, and I am currently working on Growing Up Filipino 3. These are stories for young adults. We just need good stories for our teenagers. The question of whom do you write for is tricky to answer, because on the one hand, I am writing for the Filipino audience because I feel that my stories belong in the Philippines. But on the other hand, I am writing in English because that is the best way I know how to write, and also because I do want my work to have a wider audience. I am from Cebu, I am Cebuana. I cannot really imagine writing in Cebuano. What are my chances of finding a literary agent? What are my chances of getting my work published in the US, where I reside? It would be too complicated to have to get my work published in Cebu, then have the work translated into English, and then to try and catch a wider audience. The fact also is that I have mastered the craft of writing fiction in English, and to have to relearn doing this in Cebuano would be difficult. I will tell you a story. During one of my visits to Cebu after years of exile here in the United States, during the Marcos years, I was with my nephews and nieces. We were speaking Cebuano, and I said something that made everyone pause and then laugh. I used a word that was no longer used. The word had become antiquated. The living language of Cebuano had moved on, and I was stuck with words I had used decades ago. So, having said that, though, I want to add that I have great admiration to those who write in Cebuano or Tagalog or Bicolano. Many years ago, when I was in Spain representing PEN USA West, the writers group PEN, I met some writers. And I was very impressed. They came from a small, they did not have a country of their own. They were nomadic. They lived in a particular place, but they produced their own books in their own language. They did not have a country. And this was so impressive to me. And I realized that this is important work, and it is a way of preserving one's culture, one's heritage. So here's another question. When did you realize you were a writer? I started writing at a young age. After my father died, I used to write him letters to update him of my life. Then I started to write in a journal. I recall writing my first short story for our St. Teresa's College journal, The Flint. And once when I was older, when a teenager, over the summer, I made arrangements with a local newspaper, The Republic in Cebu, to write a kind of society column about teen events in Cebu. When I was a grown woman in the United States, my husband gifted me with an electric typewriter. This was way back, and this was a new thing then. And because I felt obliged to use it, I arranged with the Philippine American News, local paper here, to write a column called Filipina American Perspective. This was a while back. While writing essays, I started writing short stories, and some of them were published in magazines like Focus Philippines, Mr. and Ms., and the Philippine Graphic. I knew then that even though these stories were published, I could do better. And that was why I started taking creative writing classes at the writers program at UCLA Extension. There, I picked up the skills and learned the business of being a writer. But even then, I did not consider myself a real writer. That sense of embracing writing as my life's work, of being a real writer, came about when my 3 sons were already in school, and I had some time to myself, and I went job hunting. I had worked as a fundraiser before, and so I went back looking for the same kind of work. To my surprise, the first interview, I was offered a job, but instead of being happy, I had the worst headache on earth. And I thought about it, and I knew that I could not be a full-time office worker, mother, wife, and still have time to do the writing that I was already doing as when the children were home. So I talked to my husband about this, and he told me, do what you want to do. And it was then that I decided not to work in an office, but so that I would be able to write my stories or my essays. That's really when I embraced writing as a serious effort. I decided to be a writer. And because of this, I made it a point to have self-imposed deadlines to finish writing projects. I'm going to answer one last question. Do you have advice to young writers? So it does not have to be young writers. Do you have advice to writers? Aspiring writers is probably the right term. Many years ago, I visited Pompeii in Italy, and I noted that the amphitheater where the gladiators fought had a seating capacity of 20,000. On the other side of Pompeii were two theaters for plays and music poetry, and the seating capacities were 5,000 and 1,500 respectively. So on the one hand, the gladiators, 20,000, theater, 5,000, poetry, 1,500. Then and now, literary artistic events have never drawn the audience that popular commercial activities do. The audience will prefer seeing gladiators killing each other rather than poetry reading. So my point in bringing this up is that we writers shouldn't sweat it if we are not popular. So here's my advice to young writers. Do not be alarmed nor too concerned if your literary creations do not draw a large crowd. This is my belief. What you are expressing is a gift from God and needs to be written or told. It is as simple as that. You are a tool. And if the creator wishes something to be said, written or told, it is for a purpose. What you need to concern yourself with is improving your craft and art. You need to be as honest as you can in your writing and in assessing your work. It is not enough to tell the truth. You have to tell it as artfully as you can. You must master the language and form that you are using, whether you're a poet, fiction writer, script writer, playwright. They always say that you need to read what you want to write. If you want to be a poet, read good poetry. If you want to be a fiction writer, read that best fiction, and so on. Don't depend on others to get your work published. This is my other advice. If need be, create your own opportunities. I have seen so many writers just wait forever to be published by a big mainstream publishing house, and sometimes they're passed by. You can create your own opportunities. You just have to, don't wait for the big one. Do not be a victim. Don't whine and complain because it's difficult to write, because it is difficult. It's difficult to get published, but don't whine about it. Explore all possibilities of getting your work out there, because there are very many. Don't buy into the idea that success is writing a bestseller. It has to be, some people think you have to have a commercial book before you're a serious writer. I have known many such writers. I've written one or two best-selling books, and then they're heard no more. Success, to me, is giving form to the story in your head. And once the story is finally written, to me, everything else is gravy. Success really is being happy with what you are doing. And so I hope you'll hold some of these thoughts, and I hope I have been of help to you. With this, I end my talk. Consul General, Vice Consul Giang, and audience, many thanks for your time. Again, if you have questions, you may email them to me at palh@aol.com. pal@aol.com. Maraming salamat.